Good morning, and thank you all for coming. I truly appreciate to see so many of you coming out today for this occasion. This is a first. This is the only time that this has ever happened in this country, so we are creating history here today. My name is Bob Cook. I'm the President of Newcastle Industrial Heritage Association, and it is my pleasure to organise the event with other heritage and historical groups here in Newcastle to recognise this event today. We've had some help from several of the railway groups, particularly the Australian Railway Historical Society. We've had a group from Engineers Australia who have helped organise this. Our friends in the marquee from Richmond Vale Railway have some videos and material there, and thank you for them. And the National Trust have been helpful. So this has been truly an event organised by the community of Newcastle, and we're proud of the fact that we're working together to recognise important marks in our region's history. So what we're going to do today is we have an exhibition of material that has come up from Canberra, and I'd like you all to take the opportunity later to have a look at that. We have a series of speakers, and we do have morning tea following the event, and our primary event today is to unveil the very nice bronze plaque that was provided to us. The Australian Agricultural Company, which is Australia's oldest company, was formed in 1824 and started working here in Newcastle in 1827, 1830. So it's a company that has essentially its roots here in Newcastle, and it is still alive today. It is continually operating, and we do thank the Australian Agricultural Company for their support and providing the beautiful bronze plaque that we will be unveiling later. We have a series of speakers, and my task as MC is simply to introduce to you those speakers. I'd like to start the event by welcoming our member for Newcastle, Bryce Gaudry. Thank you, Bryce.
Well, thank you, Bob, and we stand here today on the land of the Awabakal people. This would have been called Mullumbimba if they were here, and I pay respects to the elders, and past and present, and to the custodianship the Awabakal people held of this land. Could I start by saying a big thank you to the Newcastle Industrial Heritage Society and also Engineers Australia for not only this event but for the plaquing that takes place across this city, which remembers the enormous impact not only on the land but on the social growth of Newcastle and the Hunter Valley, of our whole mining and industrial history, and how important that is. In 1831, and I've just had the benefit of reading the news report, the Sophia Jane turned up at the wharfage here and took the first load of coal from the AA Company's pit, and there is some conjecture about where that pit was located, or not so much the pit but the railway. I was speaking before to Bob about that, but there's no conjecture, of course, about the fact that that was the start of an enormous development of coal mining and industry in this valley, insofar as it was the start of the railway system in Australia. From my reading, not a railway, of course, that was drawn by a traction engine, but a railway that, from the reading there, gravity fed the loaded skips downhill, two of them, and at the same time drew two others up to the pit head. And in 1836, by that time, we had the magnificent export of 12,000 tonnes of coal from this port. Of course, we contrast that today with the 80 million tonnes plus and all of the aspects of coal mining and development in the city. It's very significant, of course, today that we are plaquing the Australian Agricultural Company. And it is unfortunate that with bushfires raging in his area, Tim Fisher can't be here, because Tim, of course, is on the board of the AA Company. Now, of course, not operating in the mining area, and I think that's a long time gone, but operating, of course, in the pastoral industry across much of Australia. If you think about the development of Newcastle, if you think about where its parks are, if you think of its street pattern and its railway pattern, and of course if you think of those rights of way, hopefully, that will be maintained for future transport, much of that footprint has a lot to do with the AA Company. And the fact that back in 1824, as was said, 1 million wide acres was granted to the AA Company in return for them to enter into development, starting, of course, on the northern shores of Port Stephens and running all the way up to the southern banks of the Manning River, and then later, of course, changing that because it wasn't really suitable land for fine merino sheep, and moving out into the Murrurundi, Tamworth and Northern Tablelands area, where they had extensive grazing properties. But of course the significant issue for the footprint of Newcastle was the granting of 2,000 acres from, I think, the western edge of Brown Street down to Glebe Road and out through Hamilton and those areas of the city. And the pit heads and the rail lines defined the footprint of Newcastle, as did, of course, the fact that old Newcastle, the historic city, was really from that Brown Street into Nobbies. So we stayed very, very significantly impacted by the AA Company, both in terms of the industrial development of this city and the historic development of its suburbs. Suburbs such as where I live, by the way, in what it was called the Garden Suburb, I think mostly developed by the AA Company or sold for residential land from about the 1920s. That area of Hamilton South, Hamilton East, and of course the parks, as I said, the pit heads defined the street patterns in those newly developed suburbs. So it is a very significant day. It's fantastic to be here along with historians, people with an interest in industry and the history of industry, and also, of course, people from Newcastle with a genuine interest, as we always have, in what is happening in our town. So welcome everybody, thank you for coming, and let's share in a very significant period of Newcastle history, 1831, the first railway in Australia. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for that, Bryce. The next speaker that we have is Peter Sherlock, who's an engineer with the company Monteith and Powers in Newcastle. We're very, very pleased to have their support, and as one of Newcastle's fine companies, they have assisted not only the search for this particular piece of our history, but also our original convict coal mining history up at Fort Scratchley. So I'd like now to welcome Peter Sherlock to the microphone.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, guests.
Keep it up close.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks very much to the Newcastle Industrial Heritage Association, and particular thanks to the AA Company. They represent a significant focus in the history of Newcastle, and I'm sure every person gathered here is very familiar with the story. I'll show you the 1830 map done by the first John to appear in today's presentation. John Armstrong did what he described as a very careful map of Newcastle, and so it proved to be. This map draws together a series of unrelated parcels of land comprising the totality totality of what would have been the village of Newcastle in that year, 1830. We're here today to celebrate 175 years of industrial heritage, and we're able to do that because 176 years ago a surveyor came up with this map. So we're very pleased to be able to reinterpret that map. The second John in my line of discussion today is John de Gravio from the University of Newcastle, who's standing over there in the black shirt and the cowboy hat, attempting to hide behind a camera. Now, John found this map, of all places, in New Zealand, in the archives, which is his specialty, and we thank you very much, John, for your research. The third John in the line of Johns is John Wilson, standing here in the white shirt. John is our surveyor that undertook, as part of his university project, the reinterpretation of this plan to be able, in modern terms, to redefine those positions as set out in that plan. The A pit is situated, thanks to John's discovery, in the swimming pool behind the Bolton's buildings, up on the side of the hill behind the picture theatres here. The proposed site of the first coal loader is across, marked near that puppy dog, on the concrete behind the camera. And that's been fixed thanks to John's redefinition of all of those original sites. These sites were not linked by streets in those days, they were independent parcels of land. John was able to identify the fact that we had the corner of the old hospital, the corner of the burial ground below the cathedral, and a number of other points that are indicated here. Check those against modern measurement, confirm their accuracy, and hence redefine the site of this original wharf. I must say I think it's a very appropriate site that you've selected, John, as did the original John. We look around and we talk of industrial heritage. We have a tram. Newcastle had trams. We look across the road. We've got a restaurant that used to be a ferry wharf. We look across the road a little further and we see what used to be a seaplane terminal. We look behind us. We've got the rail corridor, which is still operating, thanks to many people. We look at the road complex, and we look across the road at the dockyard site, and all of the various operations of the port complex. And I think we could reasonably say that this is a genuine focal point for Newcastle's industrial heritage. Thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. I'll pass you back to Bob.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. Peter did mention someone who I didn't mention earlier but meant to, the Coal River Working Party, as represented by Gianni de Gravio and Eric Eklund and other members who are present here, are one of the key groups who were involved originally in the establishing of this. So I want to make sure we give recognition to the Coal River Working Party in those efforts, and to Gianni. The next speaker that we have, ladies and gentlemen, is Dr. Penny Pemberton. Penny is one of the archivists at the Australian National University in Canberra. The Australian National University holds the archives of the Australian Agricultural Company, and these archives do date back to 1824. So Penny, as the archivist, is truly Australia's expert on the Australian Agricultural Company, and she has a real wealth of knowledge. I know Penny wants to talk to you for about 4 hours, but she's promised not to do that right now. But if you want to talk to her over there after the speeches and the exhibition of the documents that she's brought with her today, there are some documents that I know none of us have ever seen before, and they are enlightening documents about the aspects of our early city. So there will be an opportunity to talk to Penny at length later. But I'd like to now introduce Dr. Penny Pemberton. Thank you.
To Newcastle, it seems a bit impertinent for someone from Canberra to come and speak to you about your coal mines and your railways. But first a word about the company's archives. They are extensive, about 400 shelf metres, and they are held at the Noel Buckland Archive Centre at the Australian National University. There's a particular connection with the Noel Buckland Archives where the archives are held. He came from the Hunter Valley. In the 1950s, he was the first professor of economic history at the ANU, and he was researching the economic history of the 19th century. One day in the early 1950s, he was walking down Wharf Road, and he called in at the AA Company's head office, Fanny's. It is now. And he asked if he could consult the records. And after much negotiation with London and with the staff here, the first of the records were taken to Canberra in 1953, and they've been coming ever since. In 2003, the importance of the AA Company archive to Australia's heritage of all sorts was recognised when the company's archives were placed on the Australian Memory of the World Register. As you all know, the AA Company started out in 1824 as a sheep company. It had a nominal capital of £1 million. It was never fully called the £1 million. It got to about 100,000 in the early days. The company, by early 1825, the company had barely got its act together on pastoral matters when it was approached by the British government to take over the coal mines in Newcastle. The coal mines in Newcastle were worked, as we all know, by convicts under government supervision, and the British government thought this was not right. Having been persuaded to take over the coal mines, the company threw itself into the venture, recruiting in a colliery establishment. The labour was to be supplied by convicts, but the company had to send out managers and technical people. They purchased colliery equipment, mostly pumping equipment, and half a mile of railway. In July 1826, the colliery establishment, headed by John Henderson with his wife and family, and including the brakesman James Steele, a sinker and a corver, that's a basket maker for raising the coals, a collier, 2 colliery labourers, 220 Saxon merino ewes, and 3 horses set out on the ship Australia. After a voyage of 4 months, the Australia arrived in Port Jackson. John Henderson and other company representatives went to see the governor, who was all-powerful in New South Wales. But in the way of these things, he hadn't yet received his instructions from London, so he didn't know they were coming. He was very helpful. He said they were most welcome to inspect the mines in Newcastle and explore anywhere they liked, but they couldn't have the coal mines. John Henderson came to Newcastle and he drew a plan which is up there on the wall. He then went down and bored all along the Parramatta River with no success. After a few months with very little happening, the company's local management broke up the coal establishment. James Steele went to Port Stephen. John Henderson went home to England to see the directors. The steam engines were left in store in Sydney. The colliery apparatus and the railway went to Port Stephens. Neither the directors nor the British government were terribly happy about this development. The company offered to give up the project if they were compensated. That didn't go down well with the British government. The British government instructed Governor Darling in New South Wales that he was to hand over the coal mines like it or not. The man who made this decision was the Colonial Secretary at that time, William Huskisson, and strangely, a few months later, he was the first railway accident. He was run over at the opening of the Liverpool to Manchester Railway. To compensate the company for its trouble and expenditure to this time, the company was given a 31-year monopoly of coal mining in New South Wales. That meant that no land that was granted after 1831 was to have its mineral rights, so nobody else could work for coal, and no convict labour was to be supplied for the working of coal. The company was to be it. And that lasted until 1846, when the company gave up its monopoly in order to enable to obtain the freehold title to its 1 million acres of pastoral land and its 2,000 acres of freehold land in Newcastle. John Henderson returned to New South Wales in the Elizabeth, accompanied by the new company surveyor Henry Danger, whom you would know for his earlier survey of Newcastle and his naming of the streets. The new cargo included 20 fathoms of boring rods. It was a very long and tedious voyage, made even longer by the fact that the cargo for Hobart Town, which was the first port, had been loaded underneath the cargo for Newcastle, and so the ship had to be completely unloaded in Hobart and then reloaded for Newcastle. Henderson was not a happy man when he arrived. On arrival, he inspected the steam engines, carefully packed in grease, in Captain Bunn's warehouse in Sydney, and arranged for their removal to Newcastle. The company's coaster, the Lambton, brought the railway line and the pumping apparatus down from Port Stephens. Henderson then himself came to Newcastle, and after consultation with Sir Edward Parry, who, by the way, was a Navy man, of course, decided on the site for this company's wharf. Henderson first bored in the water pit of the government pit to see what the strata was like and so on. But he soon abandoned that one. He found good coal, but the seam was only 15 inches thick. To avoid the ubiquitous quicksands all around this area, he then went over the hill and bored on what he called the upper flat. He found a good seam of coal and then chose his site on the lower flat up near the Boltons, which conveniently was just needed just half a mile of railway from the site to the wharf. In December 1830, the company accepted William Moore's tender to put down the engine pit. A drain was put in to take away the water, and you can see those in the illustrations, and the foundations were put in for the steam engine and the blacksmith shop. James Steele, who had come back from Port Stephens to Newcastle, came up with an ingenious design, which has already been mentioned, to have a self-acting inclined railway by which the full railway skips pulled the empty ones back up the inclined plane. There was then a dead flat level railway out to the wharf, the top of which was 13 feet above high water. In the middle of 1831, the government works were stopped and all the convicts were moved over to the company's works on the hill. By November 1831, the works were looking very fine, I quote Sir Edward Parry. In December, Sir Edward Parry went down to Sydney to meet the new governor, Governor Burke. On his way back to Port Stephens, back to Newcastle on the Sophia Jane, he was here to witness the ceremony. As he wrote to the directors and the dispatches inside, I was present at the opening of the company's new wharf at Newcastle, from which 2 tons of excellent coal were pro forma delivered on board the Sophia Jane steam vessel. Incidentally, they were gratis as well as the first 2 tons were gratis. The wagons, each containing a ton, came along the railway from the pit's mouth in a very handsome style, with a flag flying, and amidst the cheers of our miners and 3 hearty cheers from a considerable concourse of people following the discharge of the first ton into the vessel. In offering you, gentlemen, my hearty congratulations on the opening of these works, which are of course unique in the colony, it gives me great pleasure to express my opinion that this enterprise can scarcely fail to produce to the company a fair profit upon the capital which has been expended during my administration of your affairs. And it was a success and a profit. 2 more pits were put down on the hill before the company moved its operations to Hamilton, finally returning to this side of the company's land, the sea pit, in 1885. The company's coal operations in Newcastle ended in 1916. The railroad, the low-level bridge, remained on the site until 1865. By that point, the new municipality of Newcastle, formed in 1859, one of its first moves was to put pressure on the company to remove that railway level. And it was both government money and company money. The company sent out a new iron bridge, which was put up over the Hunter River, over Hunter Street, and it remained until 1923. And when the new iron level bridge were put in, all the company's states were raised at the same time, making them more effective. The company's head office remained here until 1964, and at that point the last major link between the company's early and major contribution to the Australian coal industry and railway history was broken. Thank you.
Penny, thank you so much for coming, and that is truly enlightening information, and we do appreciate your presence here today. The next speaker that we have is Keith Powell from Newcastle Port Corporation. An event that relates to Newcastle hardly can happen without it relating to the Port of Newcastle, and quite obviously the presence of the Sophia Jane in 1831 was significant in Australia's maritime history, and certainly it's affected the port as it has over the years. So it is truly a pleasure to have the involvement of Newcastle Port Corporation here today. I thank them for providing assistance to the running of this event, and I particularly thank Keith Powell, the representative, for coming today to talk to you. Welcome, Keith Powell.
Thanks, Bob. As I was sitting there, I was looking at the grass and I thought, isn't that amazing? 175 years ago today, we actually are on an industrial site. And aren't we also lucky that we have people who remember that, such as yourselves, but also the Newcastle Industrial Heritage Association. So, Bob, it's a pleasure for Newcastle Port Corporation to be involved in today's ceremony, and I'd just like to go backwards and come forwards if I can. Remember when the Sophia Jane was here and loaded 12,000 tonnes of coal. That's in 1830s. If you go back to 1799, there was 50 tonnes of coal loaded aboard, believe it or not, a vessel called the Hunter. And that 50 tonnes of coal went to Bengal, India. I'll be very careful. You know what technology is like. Okay, if I just go back to 1799, and 50 tonnes of coal was loaded aboard the Hunter and went to Bengal. As we moved on, that was, in 1799, that 50 tonnes was loaded by hand. It took the convict labour 5 days to load the 50 tonnes. We go to the 1830s, we have 12,000 tonnes. As we developed and as Newcastle developed as a port, we had some significant moments. Just over here, we had the Basin Coal Loader in 1967. Port Waratah Coal Services started in 1976. And today, we have... Speak loud. And today we have more than 80 million tonnes of coal moving through the port. So it's great that Hunter products are going to the world and that we recognise the significance of the events through those time periods, but also we must look to the future. And one of the things the Newcastle Port Corporation has just done is provided Newcastle University with $200,000 in research funding to look at how we can burn coal cleaner than what we can today. So although our product comes out, we also got to look to the future, also looking back. So Bob, congratulations on today. The 175th anniversary is absolutely terrific. I'm glad we recognise that. But also Newcastle Port Corporation looks to the future and looks to the future for our future generations. And hopefully in 100 years' time, we'll be looking at today and saying, what a great place we have, because I think Newcastle is great, and hopefully the port will continue to be part of that great future. Thank you very much.
Obviously there's a loose something somewhere, and of course the person who gets to have to handle that problem is the last speaker. Keith, thank you very much for that, and sorry about the microphone. I'm not sure what you do, but if you hold it like this it'll be okay, I think. So the last of our speakers today is our city's leader, Lord Mayor of Newcastle, Councillor John Tate. But just before I introduce John, one of our earlier speakers, Peter Sherlock, was mentioning to you a series of important Johns involved, and Peter did mean to mention that the last of the important Johns was our Lord Mayor. So we welcome our Lady Lord Mayoress, Mrs. Cathy Tate, and to the microphone we invite our Lord Mayor, Councillor John Tate. Thank you.
Good morning. Well, it works.
Ladies and gentlemen, Cathy and I are very pleased to be here with you. I'd just like to acknowledge the presence of certainly Member for Newcastle Bryce Gaudry and Councillor Barbara Gaudry, and also former Federal Transport Minister Peter Morris, and Councillor Keith Parsons is also with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank the organisers. This event has been organised by Newcastle Industrial Heritage Association, and with the assistance and support of a number of community organisations, and many of those groups are represented here today. The Coal River Working Party, the National Trust of Australia, Railway Historical Society have also given valuable assistance. I'd like to acknowledge the support of the surveying company Monteith and Powys in accurately locating the site of this very first railway. And of course, Penny Pemberton. Penny, thank you for being with us. You're a wealth of knowledge, and this is an important time in our history, and as we thank you for making the effort of being here today and travelling from the ANU to be with us. Ladies and gentlemen, every time I see that Lycett painting from approximately where the cathedral now stands, looking down to what we now know as Watt Street across the Nobbies, which was an island in those days, I just can't help but be excited about this city of Newcastle. And as we reflect on that, think about what we're celebrating today and look at today, it's an incredible experience for us. Just on Friday, I was at the opening of an international company facility in Beresfield, a company called DBT. They make mining equipment for the underground mining industry. They've consolidated all of their all their manufacturing operations, all of their activities in Australia in Beresfield. $25 million investment and 340 people employed. That was on Friday. That gives you an idea of today how the mining industry relates to us. And I'll come back to DBT in a few moments. I'd like to also acknowledge the contribution of the plaque by the Australian Agricultural Company. I'm disappointed Tim Fisher has not been able to be here, but of course we understand why. He has been a strong advocate for Newcastle celebrating this moment in our history, and we thank Tim and his company, the AA Company, for their enthusiasm. This is the first time that Newcastle has celebrated being the birthplace of railway in Australia. That's no mean achievement. It is generally widely believed that Australian railway operations commenced with the first steam locomotive powered passenger trains. However, the Australian Agricultural Company, Australia's oldest company, developed a network of railways to move coal 25 years before the first locomotive arrived in Australia, and you've heard a bit about that story this morning. We are here today to recognise and celebrate the achievement of our industrial pioneers. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, I get excited about that because they rode around that corner up there, which we now know as Nobbies, looking for convicts, and they saw the coal on the beaches. And that was just a little over 200 years ago. And from that time forward, this city has been a city where men and women came to work. They dug coal, they put it in ships, and the ships took it to the rest of the world. Isn't that exciting? Isn't it exciting to think that that was just 200 years ago? And we're the ones here today celebrating that work. And that was real work. That was work where you cared about the person working alongside you because it was dangerous. But it really set the form and shape of this city and the people who are here. From the time of the first coal mining operations in 1801 till the opening of the AA Company mine in 1831, convict labour was used to carry coal in baskets or barrows to the wharf and onto the ships. For the first time, coal was transported to the wharf automatically by the simplest of means, gravity, and instantly loaded into the hold of a ship. Now, that was a mechanical thing, and when you think about how that may have operated, I'd like to know more detail. We don't have the full detail, but it was quite a remarkable thing that was achieved, using gravity to let haul the empty ones back up, let the full ones come down at a controlled pace. And how do they tip them into the ship? We had a bit of a discussion about that earlier, and that's something I'm sure someone will find out in due course. They opened the bottom of the hoppers, and that was where the pin and the pin boss came from, Mr. Morris. And that's I know you've got a book about that, but ladies and gentlemen, it's an exciting time. For the first time, coal was transported to the wharf automatically, as I've said.
The reporter of the Sydney Gazette calmly referred to the event, and I'll quote, as a novel and interesting occasion. But the uniqueness of the occasion is indicated in a later passage the same person wrote, and I quote to you, in an infant colony like ours, it is impossible not to regard this event with feelings of mingled exultation and hope, for when we saw the opening of the coal works on such an extensive scale, in combination with the now certain addition to a number of our steam vessels and the probable increase of other machinery, who can venture to say to what extent these benefits may not ere for so long be carried. Well, who can say that? We certainly see that today. The Sophia Jane's steamship has also contributed to the significance of the events, as it was the first ocean-going steam-powered vessel to operate in Australia, and that was a turning point in our mining history as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the first private mining company, the first railway, the first coal loader, the first steam-powered ship, all in this location. At this location on the 10th of December 1831, the work at Newcastle changed from a harsh penal colony, as we've heard, to the beginning of an incredible growth into a busy port and industrial centre that we know it today. Ladies and gentlemen, I mentioned DBT a few minutes ago. They are a company that devote their entire efforts to underground mining. Underground mining is still alive and well and will continue to be. And when I was up there on Friday, we saw a continuous longwall mining machine, and it stretched from where I'm standing over to the front door of Scratchley's, and that's no exaggeration. And it's not that far away, they tell me, before those machines will be driven by GPS navigation and men won't need to be with them as they mine. Quite an incredible journey. So, ladies and gentlemen, can I just say, and I steal the words that Penny used, in a handsome style, these hoppers came down the hill to the resounding noise of 3 cheers. Would you join with me? And as we unveil the plaque to celebrate the 175th anniversary of Australia's first railway, in handsome style, hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Congratulations to the organisers, it's great to be here, it's fabulous history.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I did intend that one of our speakers today was to be Mr. Tim Fisher, our ex-Deputy Prime Minister. As indicated earlier, he can't be here. He was going to speak just before we unveiled the plaque, but he has sent me this email. It's sort of like the old days, the wedding days when you had telegrams, or this is sort of like the telegram. An email from Mr. Tim Fisher. Would I please read this message out to you? Greetings to all the people of Newcastle. Newcastle has the right to be proud of being the location of Australia's first railway, designed and built by James Steele from near Newcastle on Tyne, a friend of George Stephenson, and the first engineer appointed by the Australian Agricultural Company shortly after its formation in 1824. I salute the teams of workers who opened up the coal mines of Newcastle, built Australia's first railway, and dispatched our first corporate export coal to the world, in fact to India. I salute those today who have helped commemorate this vital railway heritage of New South Wales and Australia. I apologise for my last-minute withdrawal due to the extreme Victorian bushfires burning near our farm and house just near Mount Buffalo, but have a great unveiling. Cheers to all and season's greetings. Signed, Tim Fisher, Director of the Australian Agricultural Company and Chairman of Tourism Australia. Tim obviously recognises the significance of what we're doing here today. So I would now have been saying thank you to Mr. Tim Fisher for his words. Thank you, Tim. I'd now like to call upon the Lord Mayor to unveil the plaque, ceremoniously unveil the plaque. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. And morning tea will be served following the plaque unveiling. Thank you all, and morning tea is now served over at the marquee for everybody here. Thank you all for coming.